Hello and welcome to another pre-recorded session of the IEEE International Symposium on Digital Privacy and Social Media to take place on the 1st of August in San Jose, California. My name is Katina and I'm the Executive Chair of the symposium. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the main technical sponsor of our event, the IEEE Consumer Technology Society, for making this symposium possible. CTSOC realized that they required a transdisciplinary approach to address global pressing issues related to the design and development of consumer technologies, and have called for diverse stakeholders to come together to respond to digital privacy requirements and matters pertaining to social media in particular. I would also like to thank for their patronage our gold patron, the IEEE Digital Privacy Initiative, that's doing wonderful work with IEEE Future Directions, and our silver patron, the Prototype Company, led by Darren Calbreth. And of course, for their ongoing support, the IEEE Society on the Social Implications of Technologies Socio-Technical Systems Technical Committee, led by Dr. Robert Abbas, and the IEEE Santa Clara Valley Section, and the CTSOC San Francisco Bay Area chapter. We're grateful today to have Raj Sachdev with us. Dr. Raj has over 25 years of industry and academic experience and is an eCornell course facilitator. A graduate of Oxford University, he's a former visiting researcher at UC Berkeley and former instructor at Stanford CSP and Oxford University. He's a licensed attorney in California and holds several degrees and professional certifications spanning marketing, business, law, and technology. Raj will be speaking to us today on legal concepts in digital privacy for social media marketing. Welcome, Raj. Nice to have you with us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a great pleasure to be here and talk a little bit about what I feel is a very important interdisciplinary aspect of social media marketing, along with the technical, legal, and privacy angle. So thank you so much for having me. I'll just start out with talking a little bit about what we'll cover today. Social media marketing has really raised a lot of issues, and with all of that is going on in the technical sphere, that raises new novel considerations in the privacy space, but also in the legal space as well. And as many of you know, the law is pretty slow to catch up to all of this technology. So it's important to navigate the web of existing laws and regulations amidst this environment. So we'll touch on three key areas that really span technology, privacy, and the legal paradigms, and see where that discussion leads. But essentially, it is this intersection of technology, privacy, and law that's paramount to working with social media marketing. And I always feel that adopting an interdisciplinary approach means understanding the key aspects of all of these areas, without which we don't have a fuller understanding of exactly what we are dealing with. So we'll touch on all three of these areas. Are you able to see my slides okay? The full screen?
Yes, it's beautiful.
Great. So we'll just start off with a little bit of the technology parts here. And really what we're up against, and what really benefits consumers, are all these realities that are being used, including virtual reality, augmented reality, mixed reality, and combination of all of those under the umbrella term XR. Then add to that some of the applications of that, and you land in the metaverse. And we're all familiar with some of the basic uses of realities, including AR lenses that many people use on Snapchat, or all those unique and fun virtual vacations or experiences where people can really get away and feel that they have gotten away. And I guess the pandemic may have allowed some of the consumers to experience more of these things. In an earlier talk, I envisioned a virtual vacation that where you can taste and smell and touch things from other places and countries and experience all of that right from the comfort of your own home. And essentially, with all the talk about the metaverse as it is in its current sort of initial stage and what it might look at in 2050 or whatever the case may be, it's really a virtual economy and providing these immersive experiences. I know Seoul is working a lot with this new metaverse plan where they're going to try or are doing some sort of virtual administration, like a virtual mayor's office or a Seoul campus town and all kinds of new things. But really, as it stands now, there's a mix of that virtual and our physical world, because maybe you're in the metaverse, but you're ordering pizza that's going to be delivered physically to your home because you will get physically hungry as well. But for marketing, there's a whole new world out there, and this brand content, creators, these brand content creators in the metaverse are something that some people say are really going to take over. And then we all, with the AI and the ML world in social media, basic concepts of taking text prompts and having AI create images automatically from them, or using edge AI, which is processing the data closer to where the person is, let's say, for example. We're all familiar with evolving social media algorithms. I don't need to tell a technical audience a lot about these things, but these are changing. They differ. Some of the key things in social media algorithms have been, the popularity of a post or the relevancy of the content, the quality of the content, and all this boosts, things higher and upper in various searches, and the engagement or the recency of the content will boost that higher potentially, and the algorithms will do all that. Then just in this IoT world, we talk about smart things, but as others are now, pointing out, it's going to be a world of socially smart things, and automated posts or IoT advertising and all these recognitions, gesture recognition or facial recognition are what people are saying are really going to change what is happening currently. And we're going to have billions of connected devices. People already have many devices for different purposes. And then all these things around us will be connected. And we'll have novel IoT user experiences, as a Gartner report calls it, with maybe no screens and keyboards anymore. And voice search is so popular now. Ultimately, we'll end up in the IoE world, and we're nowhere near it, but in my view, we'll end up in that. And can you imagine, the legal repercussions of all of that? And then, my favorite topic is all about smart robots and smart homes and smart cities, and the way social media marketing, I guess, will impact all of that. Many people are talking about that. So if you're in a smart city or a smart home, your activity in social media will impact what recommendations you might get from a marketing angle, or what services you might avail of within these smart settings, because all that you do, share, and post in social media could be used in order to create personalized recommendations for you, which is so popular in marketing. For example, in the smart home, commands through social channels or technologies will know you and cater to your needs based on what you're doing. It can know your mood, your interactions. Who knows? It'll even call a friend into your home virtually because they feel you need that friend at that moment. So who knows, what that could result in. And these smart cities, which are up and coming, social media might just be one key form of interaction within that smart city. And it'll be real-time information that's housed in the social media. So it'll allow the smart city to actually provide smart services to you. So that's kind of an overview of just some of what is happening in the high level technical space without getting into, you know, the boring details, but essentially these all raise new privacy considerations. We're all familiar with some of the traditional ones. For example, preferences or where we are, where we're moving to at any given moment in time. It's tracking us, potentially even spying, and that could result in a breach of confidentiality, as we are very familiar with. But then, you know, the data mining that is happening with all that we have in social media and building a persona of us without us even knowing, and potentially even knowing more about us than we can remember about us. And social media bots all create, you know, potential for privacy and security considerations. Location data is very popular in marketing, and knowing where you are and allowing for you know, marketers to really target you based on where you are is really important to in digital marketing. And so that raises obvious privacy consideration. Just using a GPS to get around raises privacy considerations. Now you're adding to it a lot of other data and information and lifestyle of people. Social media impersonation could be easy if somebody has access to all of this data and information about you. It used to be that, you know, no, don't post your picture online because, you know, people might be able to now there's so much information and a lot of sensitive information. Sometimes people don't realize how sensitive the information they are posting, or may not attach importance to it, may not care about it. Everybody else is doing it. But put all that together, if somebody were to show you what that looks like, that could be scary to somebody once they see it. Device security can lead to privacy breaches, and IoT devices are being used all over the place for accessing social media. And then to the smart home, you know, the breaches can result in access to the smart home or access to the data you're using to live in the smart home, and make those, you know, better. They may be better than you in terms of knowing about you, like I mentioned earlier. And what that does is open up the possibility of a privacy breach. And then social digital selves. Not only do the marketers have profiles of us potentially, but we have our own, you know, digital personas, let's say, and that's what we are online. And whether or not that differs from how we are in the physical world, that is sort of something that may or may not be the same depending on the individual and how they behave online. But there's digital twins. And I think potentially in the future, our digital twins will really act on our behalf, because if AI can learn, or ML can learn and make decisions, then why can't our digital twin make decisions for us? Maybe we're not going to need to post all of the posts. Maybe our digital twin will think like us, know us, and do the posting for us, potentially, in some cases. But it'll know our personality very deeply. It'll know consumers' personalities deeply, and things can go wrong. It can become an evil digital twin, as some people call it. Essentially, what if we're in a bad mood or we're angry at someone else? And although this is a loose example, maybe the evil digital twin will translate that to other people, which we don't intend to reflect that mood or anger upon. The point is, anything could happen, is what I'm trying to say. and potentially it may learn from some things that we're doing which we don't intend to have them reflect. Then there's also the social and relational problems that could occur, as some researchers have aptly pointed out. We may trust a robot in a way, some may trust a robot, I should say, and might disclose more. Some will trust humans and disclose more. Some will trust some humans and disclose more or less based on the situation. But some studies may show that some consumers may trust a robot more, therefore disclose more, and that information is retained and could be used at a later stage. So these are all the potential existing and some of the future privacy considerations in social media marketing as the other technologies converge with it to provide us a better platform, let's say, in one sense, and maybe not so better in terms of the privacy sense. So that these are key, privacy considerations that may come about as a result of this. And then just kind of stepping into the legal angle of things, especially from a privacy perspective. We're all familiar with the terminology of, personal data or PII, personally identifiable information, or if it relates to health information, then PHI, and the many other names that are, given to it. And, there's some good examples of the differences between all these under the different laws, and the nomenclature is different. So personal data under GDPR, or personal information under CCPA or CPRA. So different names, potentially different definitions. And so we have to look carefully on how all of these are interpreted. But then comes the big problem. And the big problem is the law is slow to catch up to the technology, very, very, very slow. Sometimes it jumps and decides to use some cool language like automated decision making or processing in the GDPR or pseudonymization or things of that nature. And it tries to incorporate some important areas, but it may fail to address the larger and broader concerns. So the law is very known to use words like reasonable. And in various US laws, you'll hear the term reasonable privacy, reasonable security. And in the GDPR, Article 32, you'll see appropriate technical and organizational measures. Now, what in the world does all this mean? And I've talked about this before in different forums, and it's very hard until the courts or regulators or others interpret what the word reasonable or the word appropriate means in given circumstances. And that's why we have to be very careful, although I'm not able to give legal advice in this talk. We really have to work hard to interpret what reasonable or appropriate means. And it's always important to understand that there's a context behind what a court might interpret. In other words, for a given situation, such and such may be reasonable or appropriate, but in another situation, that will not apply at all. And there's an extent to which this is not perfect privacy. This is not extremely, extremely well done privacy. It's reasonable privacy. So there's a limit or so far that, organizations need to go. So it's a matter of keeping up to date with some of this information and what other companies have been up against and what courts have decided in order to know what's reasonable. And although the GDPR has been around for a little while, there's some interpretation. There's standards that have been referred to, which I'll talk about, but essentially there's no excellent definition just yet in terms of an interpretation of these concepts. And then, the US framework sometimes focuses on consent and choice. Others focus on control. And we're very industry oriented here in the US, to say that a lot of the laws are specific to industries rather than a broad law like the GDPR. And then lots and lots of state laws coming through, some of which are already enacted and others will be into the future, sort of on an ongoing basis here. And then lots of talk about a generic federal privacy law and proposals and all of that in the works. But it's not, there's no federal law currently. Nevertheless, the web of laws that have to be dealt with do have some overlap. And consent, choice are part of many of those, whether federal or at a state level. And so these are things that are implemented in social media in ways that could be meaningful, but sometimes hidden away. So there's different ways of implementing these. Not all of those will reach to the level of what the law requires. Going into the future here a little bit, we already have many touch points where marketers call these touch points where the consumer is interacting with the organization or the brand. And essentially with IoT, with smart environments, with all these touch points where consumers and people are interacting with organizations and brands, there's no longer this thing where you just go onto a website, agree to a privacy policy, and then they market to you or do whatever. Now there's so many different touch points and so many devices and so many people and organizations involved in various services that there is almost a potential need for an agreement or privacy policy every moment, in somebody's life. We're interacting with this company, or 5 suppliers are involved in that potential interaction. You just tap something and it could involve, 5 or 10 different organizations. And so do we need to constantly have these privacy policies that relate to all of these services and organizations, or do we do some sort of collective privacy policy and, not annoy consumers in that way? So the IoT and the smart and the connected world and this metaverse and all of the other possibilities that we talked about earlier are really changing the game and potentially requiring many, many touch points, which then may require a contract or a privacy policy or consent or choice. And it's hard sometimes to capture all that in one go. Maybe we don't even know what their choice would be in the next moment. So then we have to ask again. So there's going to need to be some kind of balance here. I don't think there's great answers currently in the industry about this. But I and others raise this because these touch points are going to raise a lot of issues. And if we're going to meaningfully try to do the consent, then it's going to be challenging. Other than that, I don't know, maybe it'll get to know us so well that it'll recommend what choices we should make. So maybe that will help reduce those legal considerations, but who knows? Then there's that problem with, the data minimization principle, the opt-out principle or option versus the services we can get or the personalization we can receive, because the less data and the less tracking may result in less potential for services or less personalization of those services. So I think between marketers and consumers, there's going to be a real balance needed, and where that is might depend on the consumer and the company, but that needs to be worked out because the law is sort of in conflict with the marketing aspects. That's not new. That's been happening for a while, but it's going to grow more and more and become more challenging. And that's why, I raise these considerations. And then, very popular concept of right to privacy from Harvard Law Review way back when. However, that's all evolving now. And it's not so easy to just say right to privacy. It's more becoming more of a control issue with the people or the consumers, and more consent and choice. Right to privacy does not mean you will not be tracked, essentially. And then, with all these smart robots and their connection with social media and potential connection with social media, what is the court's jurisdiction over robots? There's a lot of challenges with courts having jurisdiction to be able to make orders and against people. But what about robots? When they get so smart that they're making decisions and acting on their own based on previous considerations and data, then they may have an owner, they may have many owners, but they're essentially operating by themselves, let's say. So will the court have jurisdiction over them, or do they have to order a person or organization to do something? And then, Lemley at Stanford has raised a great point about, is there a robot death penalty coming? And will the court eventually order that the robot be put to death? And, it may sound a little funny now, but essentially it may come to something like that, where we have to just, permanently turn it off. And then, in social media, the children's privacy is a big consideration, obviously. And with a connected home or a connected educational environment where minors are living and learning, this is going to have to evolve greatly, and is not sufficient law for those environments. And then tort law. Tort law means a civil wrong. It's not a crime, but something went wrong, like an accident, a car accident, for example, where there's no criminal element to it, just an accident. In tort law, these things could make people liable, and have to pay money. And so under tort law, there's something called product liability, where an organization who manufactures or sells a product may be liable if there's something faulty with that product. Can you imagine in a social media IoT environment, in a smart world or smart home or smart city, can you imagine if something goes wrong and that has a implication on somebody's life or somebody's health or anything else? 3D printers make food for people, and potentially if that picks up greatly and everybody's 3D printing their food at home, then what if it does something wrong and somebody gets ill or even dies? So it's challenging the traditional notions of even tort law. And also part of tort law is invasion of privacy and torts. There's various torts that relate to that, public disclosure of private facts. Some of this will be on the consumers and people. If they're disclosing their private facts, maybe they shouldn't expect that they can sue somebody for doing the same with the same facts. So, and contracts, we talked about the web of potential contracts that might be needed in these environments. And finally, as all of the IEEE audience definitely knows, there's various standards out there, whether they're IEEE or there are various other ones, or ISO standards or Cloud Security Alliance standards, or whatever, or frameworks. Many are out there. And full disclosure, I did propose and draft the new legal control for the IoT security controls framework of the Cloud Security Alliance, version 2 and 3. So, but I still think various standards and frameworks are very important to the law. So if you can show a court that, this is a standard or a framework that we looked at and implemented. And that's what happens in our industry. Just maybe, I'm not saying they will agree with it, but they just may agree with that being a reasonable measure, if done reasonably, in some instances. So frameworks and standards are very helpful to understand and try to help you to comply. The GDPR certainly refers to or has built-in standards, and that references to standards might be very important in a court or regulatory setting in that way. So if those evolve for these new environments, as they are, doing now, there's all kinds of guidance and frameworks and papers on various standards for AI and IoT and smart environments. So those can help as well. But this is a little bit of a kind of what is happening now and a glimpse into the future, because all of this is coming. It's just, whether or not people will adopt it. But these are some of the legal considerations that are raised based on the privacy ones that are there and new.
So Raj, I want to begin by asking you what you think about the metaverse, whether it's a return to, great creative writing pieces and novels of the 1980s, and whether you think it's actually hype or it'll happen the way it's being proposed.
Yes, it's a tough one because of the intriguing nature of it, and I'm sort of a futurist, so I do lean towards these types of environments and technology. So I may be biased in some way towards these. I do recognize at the same time the potential challenges and try to marry and talk about the various balances I think that we need to create. But I certainly think it's going to happen. And I think there's going to be a lot of uses for something like the metaverse, with all the gaming, considerations, and then factoring it in sort of as a social media. Is it a social media sort of thing, or is this another world? Something very interesting that was raised to me, not too long ago, was the fact that people of all abilities might be able to take advantage of something like the metaverse, where they may be restricted in a physical way from partaking in the physical world as others might be able to. And that really intrigued me, because that shows that it shows the importance of something like the metaverse for people who may take advantage of it for different reasons. So I think there's a lot of sort of what in the technical world we call use cases, but I do think that it's more than just hype, and it will be something that will become part of some people's lives very regularly, just as social media has been. And sometimes people take a break and say, I'm I'm getting off here. I may receive tweets, but other than that, I'm going to take a break for a while. So there are challenges, I think, on that front, and but at least between the physical and a digital world, I think there's going to be that possibility for interactions, and marketers are certainly talking about that.
Yes, they sure are. I just have to look back to Second Life, or maybe this is Third Life. I don't know what Metaverse is, but yes, I do see the potential, as you say, for more inclusion and a cyber-physical space which does allow for neurodiversity, but also other kinds of movement, even if a person cannot move physically. The fact that you point to South Korea's Seoul Metaverse plan is a point in that direction. And culturally, I think the Metaverse is ripe for many of the countries in Asia because of their philosophy and cultural awareness around what is a living thing and what is not a living thing. Social media now, which has captivated the world since around 2006 in different formats, microblogging, and then more so the sharing of content on each other's walls, images, video increasingly, and now the potential to analyze all of these at very amazing scales, even talking on video analytics and other kinds of forms of personas, as you mentioned, and these touch points and vectors that we now have access to, feedback loops, not just by other physical humans, but by machines and bots that are constantly automated and conversing with us. I read one statistic yesterday that 72 million pieces of personal data will be collected on every child around the world before their 13th birthday.
Oh,
72 million pieces. And we just need to point to one of the other presenters, the wonderful Chris Eade, who talked to us about his intelligence organization, Zafty Intelligence, that looks at the Android device and does this passive monitoring for health responses. So not for harm, but for good. And looking at, things like, he noted, the number of times people unlock their phone every time an app is open, the time spent in the app, every app ever installed, the battery, its usage and how low it is at different times of the day, steps and movement sensors which are embedded, as you identified, heart rate, the gender, the age bracket, the phone model, the carrier network, the Bluetooth connections, geolocation, the list goes on and on. And we have these open platforms like the Android platform, which allows for this data to be gathered. What do you think is going to happen with this data? Where will it be used and how?
I think from a marketing angle, at least, it's going to help marketers to create profiles of consumers. Right now, in the traditional marketing sense, what they do is try to create a profile of what they call a target market. And then they build products, services, and advertising around these, it may not be one profile, but could be several profiles or profiles that relate to certain products, let's say, and they build this target market and they segment the market and all the good stuff. But at the end of the day, they probably think there's nothing better than building from a digital profile from actual data of real consumers. And then the challenge becomes going to, that digital consumer, because who are we online may differ from who we are physically. So they may have to create profiles of our physical self, digital self, or a combination of these. And essentially, I find that is a key use and where it might end up from that perspective. But then it could also get in the hands of the bad folks and be used in so many potentially negative ways. So I think that growing onus on marketers to protect that data to the extent of what is reasonable, and if that is protected and only used for the purpose intended and all of that stuff, then it could be used to personalize and provide better services if those are of value to those consumers that are providing that information under a consent model. But then no one can guarantee that, and there's no such thing as 100% security. So when we do, as marketers, collect it, some of that may inevitably get into the hands of others who are not for good purposes using that data. So it just becomes inevitable, I think. And then into the future, with those that are not employing the privacy settings or refusing options or not just clicking OK because they want to get to that next screen or want to get that product or whatever the case may be, want to use that app for all of that it's providing because it has enticed you to provide your contacts and everything else in order to give you free services. Just allowing all that to happen might obviously lead to that information being, in the hands of those that you may not have intended for that one service that you receive and maybe regularly use. So yeah, I think that depending on the state of security for these emerging and futuristic technologies, it's going to be in the hands of both the good and bad, at least a portion of it.
I liked how you presented consent, choice, control, and the different models in the US and also the EU. One that was perhaps more industry driven and one that had consumer data protection at heart, perhaps before industry. And you mentioned the possibility of how we might garner consent, because this is on everybody's mind. We have so many applications. On average, Australians have downloaded like 70 apps on their phone. Do you constantly go back and ask, are you sure you want to, give me access to your camera, calendar, contacts, phone, blah, 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 the list goes on. And how frequently do you do that? How sensitive is the data? And whether we are going to go towards this model, a bit like our browsers that allow us to denote our sensitivity, but then we're talking about applications and services that are owned by different parties. And that's where the complexity is. Because we don't use one digital ID to log in, despite that they would love us to use one bridged ID for persistent logging across all, as Facebook had tried to do at one stage, and in other times, Google Chrome. But what do you think will be that model? Do you think people are going to say, sure, you can have my data, you can use it for health reasons, or you can use it for telling me when I'm going to get sick, but now I'm going to charge you, says the citizen? And do you think that's a good model for privacy, or we need to look to something else? Have we invented that, whatever that might be?
I don't think we're close to that because it keeps evolving, but I think everybody is aware that not only are people having more devices and the many, many apps that they're downloading, but they're also in smarter environments, right? And they're not so smart right now, but they will be soon at the pace that we're going. Just think of when Google started and where we are already in 2022. So I think that consumers may not always want all of the options, although there's all this talk about give consumers the choice. Yes, some consumers may want the choice, and some may just want to click, I agree with anything and everything. Just take it. Yes, tell me if maybe I'm going to contract a disease in the future. Do tell me 5 years earlier if you can. AI and technology and whatever it is. Tell me that. I do want to know that. Tell me if I'm I'm engaging in something or not engaging in something that could result in a health hazard at some point in the future. And others are like, do not, my information is my information. That's between me and my doctor or health provider. So I think there's so much, there's a level of privacy, and there's a privacy versus convenience factor in here. Some may value privacy more, but get irritated by the inconvenience of having to, read through or click here, click there all of the time. But privacy and knowledge about privacy is, I think, more and more nowadays. Consumers know more about privacy than they did in the past. It's more at the forefront, and choice is more at the forefront. But essentially, with a network of devices and environments where there's so many parties involved, I do wonder, and it just came to my mind, I wonder if there's going to be something like, I choose high privacy, I choose medium privacy, I choose low privacy, rather than clicking a million times what they want to do for the specific things that they're going to engage in. So you're entering a smart business, a building, what level of privacy would you like, and adopt it accordingly. But it's going to be complex to understand. There's so much happening in a building or a city And as you land, on the plane or whatever in the future will get us there, how do you make those choices collectively or individually? And I think that's going to be a challenge.
It is. Our previous pre-recorded speaker today was Divya Chanda, who talked about privacy barometers. And different aspects in this area, and everyone has a different definition of privacy. And Nicole Stevenson also mentioned the same thing. And then high, medium, low becomes complex because we all have different awareness of what that might mean. But I do think you're on the right track there. I know when I audited a number of Australian dating online applications back in 2010, 2011, 12, I did find a lack of awareness among end users about the types of data that was actually public in that sort of setting and what was private. Interestingly, I had a neighbor move across the road whose identity I didn't know, family history I didn't know, and other details. And as I was doing this experiment, trying to find out at what granular level were these dating apps working on, it was simply so granular that my remote town in Sydney, of 2,500 people, was dissected into collection districts, as the Australian Bureau of Statistics actually gathers, 200 homes passed. And I could do a search on this dating app at that level of detail. And up comes a picture. I didn't know the name. I wasn't searching for anyone. And I was only using the geolocation feature in the dating app, just as an experiment. And public persona, everything else, nothing paid, just completely public access. And I had access to the person's name, obviously address, number of children, status of marriage, belief system, and a whole bunch of other things. And I realized at that point, people were not as aware as I thought. So maybe they had privacy risk as being in something in their minds, but they hadn't really understood, and nor had they done the test to cross-check from another computer. Can I search my name and see what comes up publicly? And also, if I go to the dating app and log in as another persona, what are they seeing publicly without a paid service? It wasn't a paid subscription service. So it shocked me. And then you talk about something so amazing, the social media impersonation. And I think we haven't taken that as seriously as we should. But now with applications that are web scraping all the images of social media without consent, such as Clearview AI, among many other organizations, might I add, what we have here is the potential for people to rebel with deep fakes, not just the impersonations, but, upset with what's going on with the web scraping, crisis, I should say. They're just going to start infiltrating the web with non-real, non-factual, dirty data, we call it, in industry and marketing. It's dirty data. And that will be, either through groups that decide to, make the ether corrupt in some way, so that when there are organizations using this for intelligence purposes, you've got a deep fake, which is the assemblage of two people, and both actually come up. And we've seen this happen with biometrics and passports and immigration officers, where two individuals can pass as one, because the image has been integrated in some sophisticated way. But now we're going one step further, and you're talking to me about social media impersonation. What are the potential harms for that?
I think there's great harms, and as you talk about passports, that really intrigued me because imagine e-passports, like legitimately e-passports that are not physical in the future, and what could happen there. But I think the harms for social media now are somebody is pretending to be another, and therefore could it could be as something like hurting other people's feelings, or they're changing their mind about somebody, potentially, all the way to damaging somebody mentally. And so because of the reliance of social media, reliance on social media by various people, I think that the potential just is manifold as a result of that. Then I think into the future, where we're not just posting online, but we're actually acting out through our digital selves. We're acting out the social interactions because we're not physically there, but we're actually, in somebody's house or visiting them in a social way through our digital twin or persona. Then can you imagine the harm of somebody actually, impersonating somebody else and entering your home to visit you, but that's not actually that person. So because the voice may be something that's automatically generated based on your voice, and it learned that, and now it speaks on your behalf. Again, this is not today; it's in the future. But these are not impossible things that that are too far fetched. These things can happen, in future years. But yeah, even now and into the future, I think that harm could just get greater and greater.
Talk to us on this. That was my very next point about the social digital selves that you mentioned. Trust the robot, you might disclose more. Interestingly, we conducted research at ASU with newly minted Dr. Jordan Miller, who used Misty the robot in conversations with those in the elderly bracket, as she defined, and how much disclosure actually occurred during those conversations between Misty and the individual was great. And this leads me to think about chatbots. We're talking about agents and automated agents and bi-directional feedback, where they perhaps learn from our behavior to begin with. After this training that's taking place over a period of time, then those Autobots are let off on their own devices to actually conduct commerce, conduct various transactions online. Do you think, as was posed by Zuckerberg and Regina Dugan, who was, I think, working for the F8 innovation space some years ago, that we will let go of typing, we will let go of the touchscreens, and whatever we speak will be heard? And do you think that's the next phase of social media, that whatever is heard, it's always listening, and it's not just for the wake words, it's for everything that we're saying in every context? There's privacy constraints around each of the contexts, and then there's this transaction processing that occurs. Tell us what you've thought about with respect to that kind of potential.
Yeah, I definitely think, because voice search is more and more popular, and starting with stuff like Alexa and others, and many people are speaking their searches and speaking where they want to go, speaking what they want to buy. I think it's just convenience, right, for many consumers. And so I do believe that voice technologies will ultimately allow us to avoid the keyboard and touch screens like you mentioned. I most certainly think they're going to go away at some point and be replaced by our voice first, I think. But it's hard to get there fully. There's lawyers have been doing dictation for many years, and there used to be I guess there still are, maybe in some cases, people typing what the lawyer says, and that becomes the letter that goes to a client or court. So that with all the software that now does it through voice, or those tablets where you're writing with a pen and it converts it into typed text. These are just the beginning, I think, of with the voice search. These are just the beginning of a change over to avoiding a keyboard, so to speak. So taking that a little further, I think it's going to go even further than that, in the sense that, with facial expressions and being able to interpret those expressions, the AI or whatever the technology may be able to learn and understand what you're thinking. I'm not talking about magical things, but more so with expressions and actions. We might be presented with a recommendation, just based on what our movement, our action, or our expression, and we don't even have to say anything, and all of a sudden we're presented with, would you like to purchase X? And we look at it and potentially say, wow, that's exactly what I needed. Maybe a long time to get there, but something envisionable, if that's even a real word, that I think could happen.
And you do actually make a fine point there about our level of sensitivity, personally, individually, the propensity to opt out versus having access to services and personalization, just like you mentioned. Tell me about the potential for manipulation by third parties. In 2014, the advertising ID was introduced into Google's suite of products, and then a bit later, the Android ID, offering almost like an application programming interface with the software development kit there for third parties to come in if someone had enabled this capability. And although these transactions and these agreements are invisible to the average consumer, how much control do you think they have over, using the average smartphone?
I think there's you mean the consumer's control, or
yes,
the
consumer's control?
I think there's more and more control than there used to be. And, we all remember BlackBerry devices, or many people remember BlackBerry devices and other devices that really sold on the fact, or differentiated themselves on the fact, that they are secure, or Apple's differentiator that they protect privacy, and they use the data potentially to for you as a consumer, but not give it away to to others potentially, unless agreed to and within that framework of control and choice. But essentially, I think that the consumers do have control. They may not be fully aware of the settings, let's say. Then with so many devices that consumers have, how much are you going to sit down and take it out of the box? You rather take it out of the box and start enjoying it, rather than sit back and say, wait, let me check the settings. Some people do that, and they disable the settings, but then it could be a peer pressure consideration. Everybody else is enjoying and getting recommendations and services, and here I'm not getting anything because I have everything off. So then they might decide to change their mind, and that's their prerogative at that point or later. But I don't think that it's highly promoted, obviously, and I'm not saying it should be or shouldn't be, but essentially the choices to some extent are there, but then you cannot download an app in some instances without providing consent to various things. So in some of my research, I and others have recommended that you have to actually provide enough value. That big buzzword in marketing is provide value. That's what it's all about. Are we providing enough value for the consumer to then consent, or informed consent, as they say in the legal world, where they know what they're agreeing to? And so the more value provided, the more opportunity that a consumer may agree with giving up their information. So I think the right balance there can benefit both the company and the consumer. And I think striking that balance is the challenge that needs to be discussed.
In the latter part of your presentation, you talked about two terms, reasonable and appropriate, with respect to law and legalese. I'd like to add in the word proportional, often used in a set of inquiry with regards to inspecting legislation. You mentioned to us the fine work that you've done in the creation of an IoT framework, and I'd like to ask you a bit about that in a moment. But increasingly, we're seeing these kinds of responses from NIST looking at introduction of new legislation like the Algorithmic Accountability Act to try and match what's happening in the EU. But we are really held by the pacing problem you also articulated. You know, this technology is moving so quickly, how are these laws possibly going to catch up? But first, if you could provide a statement to us about your work on the IoT framework. You mentioned 2 versions, and tell us more about the importance of that with respect to the cloud.
Yes, for sure. I didn't create those frameworks, but as part of the group that put those together. They're in version 3 that launched, I think, in January this year. And there's various security controls and privacy ones that are highly technical. And I proposed to the group that, you know, we need to look at more than just the technical angle. And since some of the laws are encompassing some of the technical approaches, we should cover that. And ultimately, it became a new legal domain. So there's various domains, and this is the legal domain. And there's various high-level areas that organizations should look at, all the way to, you know, very specific industry-based requirements to the broad-based ones. And if operating internationally, then some of those as well. So it's a high-level legal domain that covers sort of the broad areas that need to be considered by organizations when they are implementing the technical measures, because as we know, the reasonable security, or especially the appropriate organizational and technical measures, are not all technical. And so therefore we need to look at the various angles. So I was very happy to be part of that.
That's great work. There is research being led by Professor Gary Marchant at Arizona State University that's talking about this kind of standards development and sort of being almost de facto embraced by industry as legislation in an equivalency. So if we build the standards right and implement them the right way, then there's a process that could say, you know, well, I've espoused and embraced this standard or this framework. I'm trying to do the right thing. In, you know, anywhere that I have holes, please point them out, and I'll fill that gap. But increasingly, we're seeing this is known as soft law, that which predates, you know, the heavy regulation and law, which, you know, can come under enforcement. But these are the voluntary almost standards that people can embrace to go forward.
Yeah, for sure. They're voluntary to the extent that a law has not incorporated them. Absolutely. It could be like in the US in a common law system that a case decision of a higher court may, you know, point to standards. And there are some regulations that point to ISO standards or others, or frameworks, or whatever name we give to these. And then there could be that because the law is going to be very difficult to, you know, lawmakers are not going to create laws with all those technical details in them. And therefore they could easily point to well-made standards and frameworks to say, hey, follow these. And you will be meeting the legal requirement. Although it's not always easy to say I have followed something, because, you know, there's a lot of room of how to implement all of that, and sometimes a lot of guidance, sometimes not a lot of guidance, but certainly an argument can be made. And especially when others in the industry are doing similar, that has been used in a non, you know, privacy and security legal environment. To you know, one industry competitor says that's what my competitor does, and therefore I'm following an industry sort of standard in that sense, and that has worked in some cases. So I think there's a lot of potential for standards and frameworks to be incorporated into laws, because they move faster, they are updated more regularly, and they're done by technical staff. Not to say some lawmakers are not technical, but, you know.
So Raj, that's a great response. Food for thought, standards, frameworks, and many other things. I've asked this question of all our presenters who have been amazing in volunteering their time to share their story and their perspectives. Question: if you had one message for Silicon Valley, what would it be?
Wow, okay. I think it would be that, we sometimes think that the future is far off. And I just believe in my heart that it is closer than we think, because we're moving at multi-pace than in our immediate past. And what we accomplished in 5 years previously, we are now doing, not we, but the industry, I guess, is doing within 1 year. And devices are getting smaller and smaller. And then sometimes we move in another direction. We want bigger and bigger TVs. Not everybody will know what they want, or consumers may not always know what they want. But ultimately, I think we're going to be in the future that we think is far off a lot sooner than we think. And for that purpose, I think we have to look at this interdisciplinary perspective to really understand. And we need experts in each of these fields. We need the technical experts, the legal experts, the privacy, the marketing experts, all doing their thing with an understanding of these other areas and how they impact it. And if we could embrace that, I think that we'll be able to talk to each other a lot easier and get to the end goal, whatever that may be, in a better fashion. And that's what I would say to Silicon Valley.
Well, Raj Sachdev, what an incredible hour we've spent together. Thank you so much for your generosity. So again, I encourage everyone to visit Raj's blog online, filled with tips and tricks and information about these 3 areas. You've joined the IEEE International Symposium on Digital Privacy and Social Media, a pre-record in preparation and promotion for the 1st of August in-person event in San Jose, California. We have virtual registration options available as well as in person. If you've liked what you've heard, please come and hear from some amazing speakers on the day, in person or online. A bit of outreach: if you're interested in any of these societies or communities in the IEEE, please join us, the IEEE Consumer Technology Society, the Digital Privacy Initiatives, the Society on the Social Implications of Technology, and also the IEEE Future Directions Committee. Thank you, Raj Sachdev, and thank you for the thought-provoking messages on social media and digital privacy.
Thank you for having me.